Hi, everyone, and welcome to Café IBTTA. I'm Pat Jones. My guest today is Bernie Wagenblast, a transportation journalist and voice actor. Bernie had her start in transportation field as one of the original shadow traffic reporters in New York City in 1979. Following this, she worked on transportation in the public sector with New York City DOT and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. For nearly a decade, she served as the operations manager of Transcom, a multi-agency information center, and was involved with the creation of the I-95 Corridor Coalition. Following that, Bernie worked in the private sector for firms such as TransCore, Smart Route Systems, and Westwood One. Bernie does a variety of transportation voiceover work and can be heard on PATCO, the New York City subway system, and the AirTrain at Newark Airport. Bernie is the editor of several transportation e-publications, including the Transportation Communications newsletter and the AASHTO Daily Transportation Update. Bernie also serves as the host for the ITE Talks Transportation podcast and AASHTO's ETAP podcast. Bernie, welcome to Café IBTTA. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Pat. Great to be here.
Well, today, a big shout out to Jennifer Walsh, our communications director, because today is her birthday.
Oh,
happy birthday to Jennifer.
Happy
we
birthday.
won't tell you how old she is, but she's having a great time, and we're delighted to have her with IBTTA. Well, this is Cafe IBTTA, where we drink coffee and talk about things that are interesting, relevant, uplifting, and fun. And we are taking your questions and comments, and we want to get started right away. Last time we talked about hobbies. This time we want to know, what is your favorite meal? So using the chat function and using the selection of everyone, tell us what your favorite meal is. We want to get you involved in the conversation. What is it? Bernie, oh, here we go. There we go. Steak, baked potato, and salad. That's one of my favorites. Scallops. I was beginning to think people were not hungry here, you know?
I can tell you, seeing all these, I am hungry. I've suddenly become hungry.
Oh, veal parm, but eating veal is taboo now. Yeah. Falafel. Missed the question. Sorry. Okay. Breaded schnitzel. All right. Uh-oh. Haggis and tatties. These are great.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to have to try out some of these. It's been a while since I've had haggis and tatties, and I think I got kind of the Americanized version of that. All right. Well, we'll come back to your meals. Keep the meals coming in, and we will definitely come back. Bernie, let's turn to you. As I understand it, you wanted to have a career in radio. Tell us how you got your start in radio and transportation.
Well, for me, I knew I wanted to work in radio from about 5th grade on. News was my particular area of interest, and I would go down in the basement of my house, and I would just read the newspaper out loud to practice my voice, practice how I could read, and at the same time also learn a little bit of what was going on in the world. And so that was always my goal. I went to college at Seton Hall University in New Jersey, in large part because they had a fantastic radio station there. It was a place where you could really practice the art of broadcasting. It's not something you can learn in a classroom. You can learn history and rules and regulations, but you can't learn how to be a broadcaster without doing it. So I was very fortunate to be involved with the radio station. I was the news director in 1976, so that was a great year to be news director. We had the bicentennial, of course, for the United States. There was the Democratic National Convention at Madison Square Garden, so I got to attend that. We had the presidential election between Carter and Ford, which gave me an opportunity to go down to the White House and meet President Ford, shake his hand, ask a question at a news conference. It was, what a great year it was to do that. And I just figured that, well, after I graduate, I'm going to be working in radio, and that was my plan. Well, about a year or so after graduation, this new company, at least new to New York, called Shadow Traffic came on the scene. And they were going to be doing traffic reports on virtually every radio station in and around New York City. And they were looking for some people. And some folks at Seton Hall recommended me as one of the possible candidates. Went in, I auditioned, had a fairly good knowledge of the geography of the New York area, so I passed that part. And next thing I know, I'm on the radio in New York City at 22, 23 years old, on big stations like WABC, which was still a music station back then, with Dan Ingram, who was a legendary DJ, 1010 Wins, which is still an all-news station. And it was a wonderful experience. I did that for about 5 years. And what I didn't realize at the time was that was my introduction to the world of transportation. I thought it was just a radio job. And I ended up then, for the next 23 years, working in the transportation field.
That's great. We have a comment here from Kevin Tobias. I actually went to college to be a news journalist, and now I work in transportation. Go figure. So
yeah, another one.
So there are more people out there. So to all our viewers, if you have been in radio or journalism and now you're in transportation, please let us know. We want to hear from you. We want to hear about other folks who have a background like Bernie's. Now, Bernie, you had to spend a little bit of time away from traffic reporting, but you came back into traffic reporting because of something involving a pension system. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in New York radio, if you're on the air on most of the New York radio stations, you have to be a member of the Performers Union. Today, it's called SAG-AFTRA. And one day I was in a management position at the company that provided the traffic reports. And the union rep came by for a meeting, and he happened to look me up on the system. And he said, you know, you're 6 months short of being vested in the pension system. So I had no plans at that point to go back on the radio. But hearing that I was only 6 months short of being vested in the pension system, I said to my boss, hey, can you get me back on the air? I would love to get vested in the pension system so someday I can collect a pension from the union. And he managed to do that. I was on just for, I think, 2.5 hours a day on weekdays, but it was enough to get me into the pension system. And actually, I ended up that go round being there for, I think, about 9 or 10 years of still doing traffic reports, just on a part-time basis, but it kind of brought me back into the world of radio, which was fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Bernie, when we spoke earlier this week, you also described yourself as the Rip Van Winkle of traffic reporting. That, you know, between your first time in traffic reporting and your next time in traffic reporting, a lot had changed. Talk to us a little bit about that Rip Van Winkle experience.
Well, the first time I was a traffic reporter, which was between 1979 and 1985, the technology was not terribly sophisticated. We used spotters with binoculars atop the World Trade Center and the Empire State Building to see delays. We had airplanes that were flying over the suburban areas. We had CB radio that we used, remote-controlled CB radios that were strategically placed around the metropolitan area to gather information. And in the 23 years while I was gone, things changed quite a bit. That's a bit of an understatement. The internet came along, traffic cameras, cell phones. So all this new technology and new ways of gathering information, being able to look at maps from the various state DOTs or from Google Maps and seeing how fast the traffic was moving. And that was available now 24 hours a day, whereas when I first started doing traffic, we were just doing it during the rush hours. Peak periods were the only times we were on the air. But now traffic was a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation. So getting that information all the time and having it available made such a world of difference. So that was why I describe myself as the Rip Van Winkle, because so much had changed technologically in terms of how we gathered the information. Still the idea, though, of providing the information basically remained the same, but how you gathered it changed quite a bit.
You know, as you're talking about this dramatic shift in where we get our information, I'm thinking about Meemaw, who's the character with the Northern Virginia Department of Transportation Twitter account. I'm trying to remember her name. Wanda, maybe you can type it in the chat here. But it's just a wonderful account where she sort of has a light and kind of irreverent tone about how to behave in traffic and giving advice to people on how to be safe. So and it's really engaging because she's getting people who are out there in traffic to report what's going on, and it's more of a dialogue than sort of the alert here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's one of the nice things is the first time round, it was very much you sharing out the information. You didn't get a whole lot of feedback from the listeners. Twitter and Facebook and other social media now allowed it to be much more of a two-way street, and for you to get communication and hear from people who are out on the roads. And of course, cell phones allowed people who were stuck in traffic to make sure you knew about the places that they were stuck.
Bernie, there's something really special about radio that you're really only using one sense. It's the audio sense. Mm-hmm. And you've described it as really intimate. Tell us a little bit more about that.
To me, radio is, and audio in general, not just radio, because it's obviously grown in audio books and podcasts and things of that sort. But quite often when people are listening to the radio or listening to a podcast, they're by themselves. You might be talking to them while they're in their car commuting. Maybe you're talking to them on their headphones while they're exercising or taking transit. So it's very much you talking right into the ears of the listener. And you don't have the advantage, or maybe in some ways a disadvantage, of worrying about images that you have to share. You have to paint the picture with your words and with your voice. And I think that causes you to be a better describer of what's going on, and not just depending on a map that's behind you, for instance, of showing where the traffic is, but trying to make people understand how serious something may be, or sometimes how lighthearted something may be.
Right. And that's where the journalism comes in. You start living by that rule of don't tell, show. Mm-hmm. Paint a picture with your words of what it is that we could be seeing. I was listening to one of the NFL playoff games on the radio the other day, and the radio announcer was saying, this team is moving from left to right. So you could sort of place yourself visually in the position of the announcer and know which direction the Kansas City Chiefs are moving on the gridiron. Mm-hmm. It's a great way to really draw people in.
Yeah. And, with a sporting event, to me, baseball still is best on the radio as opposed to watching it on television. You don't have all the distractions of all the various stats and everything, but you also have the crowd noise to let people know what's going on and give a sense of how exciting it may be. But when you're doing it, it's your voice and how you use that voice. It might be how you pause, how your voice goes up in volume, things like that, all help paint that picture for the listener. Right. A few more people have revealed themselves as closet journalists. Let's see. We have Ian Deckard. My first job was in radio in New Iberia, Louisiana. I still have a non-expiring FCC card. Great, Ian. And Steve Morello says, of 3 degrees, I have an MA in journalism. All right. And Wanda, thank you very much. You've revealed that VDOT's Mima is Ellen Kamalakis. And I think she's actually moved up in the organization and has shed the Mima role, but maybe she occasionally drops into it again. And you're welcome, Lydia, for the reference to the Chiefs. All right. Bernie, you mentioned, cameras and sighters from the top of the World Trade Center. And I happen to know that you were working for the Port Authority during the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about what that was like. Well, I worked actually not in the World Trade Center. I was over across the river in Jersey City, New Jersey. But it was very clear because I was working at Transcom at the time. And part of what we did was monitoring the scanners, and so you could hear what was going on in the region. So we were aware of any problems that might be affecting other agencies. And clearly there was a lot going on. You heard early reports, but it was clear very quickly that this was not just a circuit breaker blowing or something like that, that this was something very serious. that had taken place. And from where we were in Jersey City, we could go up on top of the building and see very easily. It was probably only a mile away from us, the World Trade Center. And although the bombing took place below ground in the parking garage, there was smoke that was coming out of one of the towers. So
Right.
it was very clear. And, you know, certainly as somebody who lived in the New York metropolitan area, that was very concerning. But as a Port Authority employee, many of my coworkers were in that building. And so you're worried about them and what's going on. And again, the early hours, you're really not sure what is taking place. And that parking garage where the bombing took place, I had been in and out of that many times, you know, with various fleet vehicles going to and from the World Trade Center. So that was certainly playing on my mind. And in the weeks following, they closed the World Trade Center because they had to secure the building and rebuild the basement area where the bombing took place and clean the whole tower, both twin towers, because the smoke had left a residue throughout the building. So Port Authority staff were sent out to all these various locations where they could have their offices on a temporary basis. So we were sharing offices with the people who were at that time just setting up what became Easy Pass. So it was we were co-locating with them while that was being put together.
Bernie, thanks for the stories there about the World Trade Center and how sort of the aftermath of that and how people were coping with that. You know, you've also seen, as a journalist, as a transportation journalist, you've seen some big changes in transportation. And I wonder if you could just tell us about some of those big changes that you've reported on.
Well, let me start with one change that doesn't involve technology necessarily, although it's certainly helped by technology. And I think there's much more of a sense of agencies working together than they did in the past. When I was first involved with traffic reporting, everyone pretty much kept to themselves and they focused on what they owned and what they operated. But being involved with Transcom, which brought together all the different regional transportation agencies in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, it was a way to bring all of these agencies together and to show how a problem on one can quickly affect other agencies that might be impacted by something. So if you have a problem, say, on the George Washington Bridge coming into New Jersey, well, that's going to affect the New York State Thruway because alternate traffic is going to be going up to the Tappan Zee Bridge. It's going to affect traffic in New York City, so New York City DOT, NYPD, New York State DOT, just as an example of things. And you have to divert people around and away from that problem. So that's one thing. But on the technology front, there's been so much that's changed. Transcom was fortunate because we were this multi-agency hub to be able to demonstrate new technologies to all of the agencies. So one of the things I remember us doing, we had learned that Caltrans had used something in California called a Velcro truck. And a Velcro truck, you might be wondering what that is if you're not familiar with it. It was a utility truck that had a board that could be raised on the back and strips of Velcro across this utility board. And on the truck was a library of strips of information. So it might say merge left, merge right, accident ahead, something like that. And those could be deployed to the scene or before the scene of a collision and alert drivers to what was going on before portable VMS were widely available for people. So that was an example. We had an early example of video where we used what was called slow scan video. And you could take a regular consumer video camera, hook it into the cell phone, and send still images that would be updated maybe every 20, 25 seconds from the scene of an incident. Again, sort of the first remote video that was available to let agencies see what was going on with a crash or some construction problem, as an example. And we also, when we communicated the information, this is before the internet, we used alphanumeric pagers that each of the agencies had in their operations center to send out in abbreviated text what was going on at the neighboring agencies. So everyone had sort of a rundown before there was something like Google Maps or 511 to let you know what was happening at the various agencies' properties. So those are just some of the examples of things that we used.
Bernie, probably a lot of people know you from your transportation communications newsletter, and you are a prolific producer of newsletters and podcasts. Tell us about some of those other projects you're involved in.
Sure. Well, the Transportation Communications newsletter, it's celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, which makes it older than Google, I'm always proud to say. Basically, I started that when I was first involved in college with the media. I had thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to have been involved with radio, say in the 1920s and 30s when it was first starting, or the 1950s for television? But I didn't see any new medium coming along. But in the 90s, the internet really started to become popular. So it was my first opportunity to be involved with a medium that was brand new. And I was trying to think, what can I do? And I decided, well, let me create this transportation communications talk group where we could share information about things that are happening in communications in the transportation field. Well, that evolved into the newsletter, which I've been doing every weekday since 1998. But some other people saw what I was doing and asked if I would do something similar. So for a number of years now, probably 15 years or so, I've been doing a daily newsletter for AASHTO. I do newsletters for ITS Canada, ITS Michigan, UITP, which takes in an international flavor to it, and just try to basically share information from a variety of news sources to let people know an easy way for them to keep on top of what's happening. Each one has a little bit of a different focus. I also do a couple of podcasts. I started something, as you see here, called Transportation Radio, which was just work I was doing on my own, but it led to the Institute of Transportation Engineers and then later AASHTO asking if I would host podcasts for them about transportation. And it used some of the skills that I had developed way back at the beginning of my radio career in terms of doing interviews and talking to people and soliciting information from them. And that's kind of what I'm doing these days. It's been a lot of fun.
So Bernie, speaking of transportation radio and the other podcasts you do, could you give us an example of the guy voice that you use on those podcasts?
Sure. Or I can, maybe better still, if somebody has been to the New York area and ridden the subway, this is what you might hear me saying. The next downtown number 2 will arrive in 3 minutes. Please stand away from the platform edge. So that's a little bit of an example of the guy voice. And I still use that for the podcast, and I still use it for my voiceover projects and such. But it's a fun way to be involved.
Yeah, that is fabulous. I am definitely, after hearing that, I am definitely stepping away from the platform edge. No question about it. So Bernie, you're in the midst of a personal transition in your life, and I wonder if you could tell us about that as well.
Sure. Just before January 1st, I shared on social media the fact that I was transitioning. I have known from my earliest memories that I am transgender, although obviously I did not know that word when I was a kid or even an adult, because it really didn't become a known word until maybe the 80s or the 90s. But I always knew that. And I think a variety of things caused me to feel that I needed to finally transition and live my life as how I've always felt inside. And I'm only 26 days into this transition at this point. So I'm still learning a lot. As I said in the my coming out note, it's going to be awkward, not just for me. I know it's going to be awkward for other people. And I think we have to all grant each other a little bit of grace as we adapt to these changes. There are the physical changes in terms of how I present. There's the change of how my voice sounds. There's even the change of the pronouns that I use, going from he, him to she, her. But I know that is not something that it's like a light switch that you can just turn on and off. You have to adapt. People have known me for 60 plus years as he, him, and used to the guy voice that we talked about before. One of the things I was fortunate with is my name. I've always been known by Bernie, but Bernie can also be short for Bernadette. So in that way, people at least did not have to adjust to a new name. So they still can call me Bernie, and that still works.
Bernie, that's great. And I was just reflecting that when you reintroduced yourself to the LinkedIn community in late December, a part of your post said this: I ask you to be patient with me as we go through this transition. I know there will be an awkward phase as you and I try to figure things out. Please don't worry about saying the wrong thing or offending me unintentionally. I realize everyone who knows me will be making an adjustment. I just think that's such a generous statement that you made, and giving people an opportunity to make mistakes as they try to, embrace your new reality.
Thank you. Yeah, to me, again, I know how big a change this is, certainly for myself, what an adjustment this is, but I know that it's not just me that's adjusting. And if I don't show grace to other people and not get upset if they use the wrong pronouns or somehow misgender me, then I don't deserve their patience with the changes that I'm making and the mistakes that I will make along the way.
Bernie, when we spoke earlier this week, you talked about, you said that people are scared about what they don't know. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit more about that and how we can make people less afraid of what they don't know.
I think it's through experience. This was certainly not the reason I transitioned, but I hope it's one of the side effects of my transition is for those people who know me, to let them see that this is not so scary, that I am still the same person that I always was. It's just a little bit of a different package that they're seeing now. And that change, as it becomes more expected or seen, that it becomes more accepted. I think back to when I was younger in the 1970s and the 1980s, a lot of gay people were in the closet because that wasn't well known or understood. It was scary to many people. But as people started to see gay people who were their coworkers, their neighbors, maybe someone in their family, it became much more accepted and people adjusted to that. Transgender people were a much smaller percent of the population than the gay population. But I think it's still, as more people see those of us who are trans in everyday life, then it does become more acceptable, I hope, and more understood and less scary.
Bernie, what's a good way for people to connect with you, say in social media? What's a really good connection?
Well, certainly LinkedIn is what I use professionally. So anybody wants to look me up, you'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook. I have my transportation radio page on Facebook. That's another place that people can find me. So any of those places, and I'm out there enough that if you do a Google search, you should be able to locate me without too much problem. There aren't too many other Bernie Wagenblasts out there.
That's great. Hey, Bernie, I'm going to make a couple of announcements, and then I'm going to come back to you with some final words of wisdom.
Thank you.
So to all our viewers, don't forget to complete the survey you'll receive at the end of today's program. Here are some upcoming events. Our next scheduled guest on Café IBTTA is Victoria Sheehan, the new executive director of TRB. She'll be our guest on February 22nd, but watch your calendars. We may have a guest before February 22nd. March 25 through 28, Norfolk, Virginia is our communications, HR, and legal workshop. April 29 through May 2 is in Indianapolis, Indiana, is our technology summit. And June 4 through 6 in Salt Lake City is our road usage charging conference and finance conference. Check the IBTTA website for details on all of our in-person and virtual events. Well, Bernie, what final words of wisdom do you have for us before we sign off today?
Well, thinking about today's discussion, it's really quite a bit of it is revolved around change, technological change, as well as personal change. And one of the things I think I've realized at my age is that change is constant and it's inevitable, but the fundamentals basically remain the same. While we use new technology to share information about what's going on the roadways or on the transportation system, the fundamental of needing to communicate remains the same. The ways we do it have changed. And in the same way, a person changes. They grow, they learn, they evolve. The basic humanity of that person remains the same. So I hope that while we adjust to change, we keep in mind that the fundamentals really remain the same.
Bernie, that's a beautiful sentiment. Thank you so much for being our guest on Café IBTTA. It's been a delight. And to all our viewers, be safe, keep in touch, and we'll see you down the road. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.